Ladies and gentlemen, as a reminder, please silence all electronic devices or put them on vibrate mode. Thank you.
Carry on, please. Good afternoon, Sabres. Awesome. Is that able to see that pretty well? Is the screen working out? Awesome. You guys look pretty good up there? Yes, we look fantastic. Excellent. I thought so. You know, the cool part about that, a chance to see some of the many things that you all have been doing over the course of the year, step by step along the way, all the way through some of the exercise footage from the last couple of weeks. And we'll talk a little bit more about that as we go on. Chief, great to have you up here with me, and a chance, a great opportunity to catch up with all of you here. So, logical question, Voss, why are we here? Excellent question. I made a contract with you at my first commander's call, and that contract still stands. How's this working out? Can everybody hear me okay? Okay. So that contract, I won't bring you all in for a call unless there's a very good reason for you to take a chunk out of your day and gather up to spend time talking about whatever that key thing is. And read last week that there absolutely was a very good reason to get everybody together and talk. Hang on 1 second. How are we doing now? A little bit better? So, who heard there were a few things announced last week? Big changes on the horizon for the Air Force. Anybody? A couple people out there? So this will be new to a lot of you. Chief and I were in Washington, D.C. last week at the Air Force Association Air and Space Conference, Airspace and Cyberspace Conference, and we were there at the behest of the Secretary of the Air Force, the Chief of Staff of the Air Force, and the Chief Master Sergeant of the Air Force. All not only invited us, but specifically highlighted that they wanted us to be there because they intended to roll out large changes for where the Air Force is going on the horizon. And I think, Chief, you would agree, it was pretty large.
Pretty valuable, sir.
So, and we want to communicate that to you, and as does the Air Force writ large want to communicate that to you, because it is where we're going. How many captains and below and tech sergeants and below? Hands up, raise them up. Yeah, so as you look at this, as we walk through this, this is the force of your future. You will see this in your time, and importantly, you will be the leaders of that force as we progress into this force of the future. So I want you to think about that. I want you to internalize that as we go into and we talk about where we're headed. And so we're going to talk about the Air Force that we need, the way that we are going to present that force in the future, and then some key elements in what we value in all of our airmen as we go through and we make those changes and we progress into the future. What you can expect, I'll tell you right now, I would expect as we walk through this that you're going to have some questions in principle based on the types of changes these are. I know that the Chief and I certainly did, sitting in the audience as we watch some of these things roll out, the slides roll out. It certainly generated some questions for us. So we will definitely have ample time when we get to the end for any questions that you have. Chief and I will be up here ready to go, ready to answer those to the best of our ability. The answer in some cases will be that we don't know the answers yet because the Air Force hasn't quite fleshed that out. But that's the baseline of where we're going. And so as we look to walk into where the Air Force is going, the Air Force of the future, as laid out by those senior leaders, there's a part of where we're going that also involves where we are now. And so we'll start there. Slide, please. So I passed out several months ago. Who's seen the National Defense Strategy? Who's taking a look at that? All right, I see more in the front rows, not as much in the back rows, which kind of makes sense. I pushed that out to all the commanders when it was released because it is a foundational document and it is a radical shift from where we as a nation and we as a national defense apparatus have been for many years, I would submit to you, since the end of the Cold War. I bring it up now because it is the foundation for all of these changes. So, right on that first top line, that is the principal major shift, that you have to look at the world of today and think about the world of today through that lens. Great power competition. Burn that one into your brain. Great power competition of a level that we have not seen since the Cold War, from a time frame where the United States and the Soviet Union looked across the fence at each other as the two major powers in the world. It is different now in that there are two great powers in the world that we have to contend with, that we have to think about, that we have to orient our national defense around. Those two being China and Russia. So, for folks who have been paying attention to the discussions, we've been talking about 5 major threats to the United States for close to a decade now, as we've shifted from principally focusing on violent extremist organizations and then looking at China, Russia, North Korea, and Iran. And we considered it 4+1 for many years. In the past year, we made a major shift and said it is, and that is principally why those China and Russia have been competing, and that's the reason we use the term competition. Very specifically, competing with the United States for global, with an absolute intent to change the way the world order sits, change the way people think about who has power and who has influence. And it is very consciously a direct challenge to what we do. And that's the foundation behind this national defense strategy, and the reason that we have to modify the way that we think about the business we do, the business of global defense. So, challenges to the U.S. military, those cases in China and Russia, and principally for us in this AOR, we think about it through the lens of Russia. That is who we focus on here. And very consciously challenging us in particular, things that we have seen, moves they have made. Their movement into Crimea, the annexation of Crimea, a direct challenge to the United States and NATO writ large as the alliance that governs security in this AOR. To include additional forays out into the other part of USAFE Africa, influence in Africa, very specifically challenging the United States, NATO, and allies for influence abroad. Rapid technological advancements. In many, many ways, a few of those being things like surface air missile system abilities, things that are part and parcel to what you all do here, critical in the way that they challenge us. Both China and Russia have the capability to directly affect the homeland, both the United States and obviously that of our European partners here. And on the WMD front, that ranges many things. What I would encourage you, when you look at it that way, is looking at the realm of nuclear weapons. It is a return to discussions of nuclear weapons in the day-to-day engagement, both in defense, but also really at a State Department level in terms of negotiating. The way that we think about nuclear weapons is different. In a past call with you, I talked about changes in the way that the Russians specifically think about the use of nuclear weapons. They've written in open source that they would consider using a tactical low-yield nuclear weapon to attempt to end a conventional conflict, long before anyone else considered or did employ nuclear weapons. That's a significant shift, and it's something that we have to think about. Vladimir Putin himself specifically highlighted that. Anybody know when he highlighted that? When he said that? 2000. 18 years ago. We're a little bit behind understanding some of those shifts and translating that into national policy. But we're there now, and it's the way that we have to think about the way we do things. So for us, on the WMD front, I would tell you that's the key thing to remember. So when those are elements of great power competition, what I want you to take away is that is where we are. It is a great power competition. And as a result, the National Defense Strategy tells us that there are 3 lines of effort that as a nation we will pursue. Building a more lethal joint force. That should sound very familiar to everybody. We've been talking about that. Strengthening alliances and building partnerships. Absolutely what we do, in particular here in this command. And then reforming DoD business practice. I really don't care whether you remember that part. That's not so much us. But those top 2, absolutely us. That is the core of what we do. And so when we think about the situation we're in today, and that is the situation we are in right now, and frankly I would say have been for a while. That is the way we have to think about the world, and those are the lines of effort that we have to pursue to make a positive impact in global defense. Compete with that great power, deter that great power, and if called upon, be prepared to win in a near-peer fight. A very major change from the way we've thought, and something cognitively we've got to understand the increase in the costs that we're talking about. This is very, very different, considerably more dangerous, much higher cost of lives, equipment. So thinking about it that way. And the way that we do that is a categorical difference, not just being better. We always work on being better, but it is being different in the composition of our force and the way that we present the force forward. Slide. So I'm going to bring up 2 slides for you. They're a little bit of an eye chart. Hopefully you can see from the back, but these slides are direct from the Chief of Staff. These are the exact slides that he briefed and the Secretary briefed all of us on at AFA, as well as in the Wing Commanders Conference, which followed. So the first thing I would tell you to key in on is the lower right corner of this slide. When I talk about the force we need, 1, it starts with squadrons, and as you know, our focus area, Chief of Staff focus area to revitalize the squadrons, the reason is because the Air Force Squadron is the fighting force of the Air Force. That is what we push forward. That is the fist is the terminology that the Chief and the Secretary are using. It is the fist with which we engage the enemy. And of the squadrons we have, right now there are 312 of those operational squadrons in the Air Force. Based on the changes in the global security environment, the direct assessment made by the Secretary, the Chief Master Sergeant of the Air Force, is a move to 386. 24% increase overall in terms of those squadrons. That is a massive increase, the scale of which we have not seen for many, many, many years. World War II, I would actually submit to you. So that's the big structural change. What does that mean to us in terms of size of the force? To be able to do that, you're talking about 40,000 more personnel across the force. Where does that fit? A few things that are logical questions that start to come up. In terms of active, guard, reserve, the total force structure, game plan, right now as they look at it, it is the same ratio that we have now, essentially expanded. So you'll see expansion in the active duty, you will see expansion in the guard, and expansion in the reserve component. What you will see from this slide is, as you look at the numbers of specific capabilities and where there's growth, is that it is very targeted. So let me give you a little background behind that. First off, rationale that led into this. Looking at the National Defense Strategy, under congressional testimony, the Secretary and the Chief were both directly asked by Congress to execute this strategy, what do you need portion of that? And so this is the first fairly comprehensive analysis, the first cut of analysis to be able to provide that answer to Congress, which is why they rolled it out at the conference at which the chief and I were. What did they base that on? When you look at that, how do we check to see how that would play out when we look at that great power competition? For those who are not versed in it, each of the combatant commanders, and the entire joint community there and coalition allies, more specifically to us here, European Command and all of our allies, we look at plans that would be executed in wartime. That is part of the calculation. The other part of the calculation comes from wargaming. Deep inside the Pentagon, we have lots of computers and all their time trying to think through these things. And they run war game after war game after war game. And they did a tremendous amount of that led into this, looking at both the plans and the likely way that those things would play out. When they do that, that's what helps them come up with these numbers. We're not going to go any deeper than that because you start to transition to a different classification when you get detailed. But the point being, that is the background. These numbers are not plucked out of thin air. They've come very clearly from looking at the plans, wargaming these, and seeing what we need. Now, the next level of detail within that, why do you come up, for example, with a significant increase in global reach, global power in the bomber category, tanker category, for example, when you see their large increase in that? When you look at the fights in the Pacific and in Europe, then you're looking at a requirement, a need to increase in those capabilities. Further down, you see cyber and space. Highlighted on the left as two areas where we need to have a significant increase, nearly double the capacity in some of those. Why is that? Obviously, like ISR in there, there's a certain amount of it, of the way in which we look, listen, and sense what the adversary, the competitor, is doing. But part of it, as you hear multi-domain command and control, multi-domain operations. Part of this transition is our movement into not only operating in multiple domains, which we do, but being able to provide and create and merge synergistic capability and synergistic effects across multiple domains, those in particular. You will see that some areas don't increase, and you might be surprised. Any of our cyber folks in here? All targeted pockets, excellent. So, does it make sense to you that there's essentially no growth in there in cyber? It's such a big deal. Here's the reality. We already know we're making a transition in cyber. We're going to make a transition of how we employ our comm folks, moving them from comm to cyber. So in that force of the future, it's ostensibly, it is a net equal in terms of manpower that leads us there. Similarly, you might ask the same question when you get down to missiles, the nuclear regime. Why do you not see a change there? Similarly, right now, we've already put a lot of investment, and there's a lot of investment on the books to energize that portion of the enterprise. But it's the ability to reach out. And when I talk about bombers, I'm not talking about more B-52s. This is the bomber force of tomorrow, B-21s. This is KC-46s, the tanker force of tomorrow. So it is an increase over the time, the future force that we are creating now, that you will be operating in and with. Over the next time horizon-wise, about 12 years. 2030 is the target time frame from an Air Force leadership perspective when we can reach that point, which is aggressive but achievable with the right level of support coming from above. And I'll tell you, I think There's a lot of energy behind that. Why do I say that? This would be a very bold rollout for any service to step out in the public sphere, and this is as public as it gets. The way rolling something out at AFA is like grabbing a bugle in the middle of the Pentagon. It's about as loud as you can be. And to say, throw down, we need a 25% larger force is a massive statement. But the interesting thing in the days that followed the initial rollout, not a single question about whether the requirement was valid, whether there was an absolute need for this to occur from any sphere. It was immediately followed up the next day by the Deputy Secretary of Defense, Patrick Shanahan, spoke at AFA and clearly relayed the need for these forces. And probably more importantly, surprise to those of us who were there, surprise guests, the Vice President of the United States stopped into AFA and talked, and he spoke about the changes that we are making. To my knowledge, that's never happened, that the administration, either the president or vice president, in this case, vice president, specifically highlighting that he was speaking on behalf of the president and highlighting the need for this shift and their dedication to helping Congress, working with Congress to pass the budgets, to support it, and to ensure that all of you get the best equipment possible to make this future force a reality. So, and even from the halls of Congress, who you would expect to be the quickest to ask questions, no questions in terms of the validity of the requirement. I bring that up because it's important, because they're not even attacking it. No one's coming in from the sides to say that this should not happen, isn't going to happen. They're actually supportive of it from all elements of government. And so that lends a lot of credibility to our ability to move this forward. So from the Air Force we need, what should you take away? Number one, big increase. 386, burn that number in your mind. That's where we're going. But also for those you younger folks who are going to hang around, which I expect many of you are, this is your force for the future. Slide. So that's the force we need. Now, how are we going to operate differently? When we say present forces in the big picture, what does that mean? That means how do we send stuff forward? Are we good at that already? Sure we are, right? Just a couple of years ago, we sent the Warhawks forward in operating out of Jordan and annihilating ISIS, in the words of the Secretary of Defense. We're pretty good at this. But this shift is different than that. So there's a lot of words up here, right off the bat on the top, OCPs. Who's thinking about new uniforms? Solid, at least you're honest, I like that. So that's not what we're talking about. Operational capability packages. That's a fancy Pentagon word for a certain amount of combat power that a service is going to push forward. For us, we think of it in terms of squadrons. So, types of squadrons we will push forward. Combat squadrons and combat support squadrons. And that upper left-hand side, that's the takeaway. That is the way we think about combat chunks that we will push forward. The next thing I would tell you to focus on is that far right-hand side where you see expeditionary, a numbered expeditionary air force, an air expeditionary wing, air expeditionary group, and air expeditionary squadron. Why is that important? So we talked about the different landscape. The way in which we operate will be different. You are all a part of our shift into this. Everybody who has gone forward to Romania or one of our other TSPs to these austere locations, that is setting the template for what we do. We will push forward to less built up or not built up at all airfields, and we will operate out of those in a very agile manner. That will be our task here. How do we do that? We will push forward not as an air expeditionary force, but as an expeditionary air force. Going back to our roots, if you think back through our history, how we pushed out from World War II forward. It was in this expeditionary manner to be able to stand up a capability. And that's exactly how we will operate. We will push forward. We will hand a squadron commander a full component that is needed to operate for some period of time, days, weeks, and tell that commander to push forward with the squadron and begin operating. Or at a group level, or even as a wing, pick up your wing, move to a forward location, establish a base, be able to defend that base, be able to build some form of indications and warnings, getting a sense of what is a threat to your base, being able to command and control that organization with or without any external input, whether the AOC can talk to you or not, whether you can get direction from your leadership, that squadron commander, that group commander, that wing commander, controlling those forces, launching aircraft, launching operations based purely on commander's intent as laid out by a CFAC in the initial phases. Lots of autonomy handed to those leaders to be able to execute. A lot of authority pushed down. When you look at the bottom, those bumper stickers, self-sufficient, self-sustaining. So a certain amount of support that's going to have to be baked into those organizations as you move forward, and self-defending. Adequately resourced, the right stuff, adequate authorities, commanders who are empowered and feel empowered and are ready to lead those forces moving forward. So that shift, squadrons, groups, wings that we push forward to operate on their own with all of the support elements baked into them. Okay, so that's the force that we need. 386, the force we present, expeditionary in nature. The other component of that is what is it that we value in you as airmen moving forward. Slide.
So, one thing that they brought up over and over again as they talk about the force that we're going to need is a couple of things. They talked about thinking different in these multi-domain environments, which means you got to shift your mindset. And the thing that they brought up was this thing, hybrid airmen. Most of us have grown up in our primary AFSC, but they want this hybrid airman where you're going to be looking kind of outside of that too. So the boss talked about tech sergeants and the CGOs coming up. Most of them kind of grew up in that primary AFSC, but now we need you to be thinking across different multi-domains. Thinking like a crew chief. Any crew chiefs in here? Really? I mean, I'll get a yay, a hey, or something. Y'all more lively than that, right? So again, they want you to think like crew chiefs because they're not specialized in one specific thing. They know the entire aircraft. And then it starts with you being resilient. Resiliency starts with you, sitting in the mirror. Every day, you should be thinking about these particular things and being resilient. Strategies. Find your purpose. That is so very important. I often talk to many different avenues and crowds, and I talk about your purpose. Because if you don't have your purpose, then I don't have your commitment. And I don't care where that is. You can go work at McDonald's, you can go work at Starbucks, you can go work at Amazon. And I can promise you, if you walk in there every day without a sense of purpose, you will not stay. So we have to give you purpose. That's what the boss talked about, all of those things, giving you a purpose. And as a resilient airman, it starts with you. You have to find what your purpose is. And then develop your social network. Oftentimes, I talk about in our social networks, as senior leaders, our networks are not for us. Our networks at this level are for our airmen. So we developed social networks. Being the boss did a very good job of that at AFA. Every social network that I had, I introduced him to. Every social network that he had, he introduced me to. And at the heart of that, it's going to be able to solve problems for you all much faster. So you can get at what your purpose is. So I implore you to do the same thing. Find your sense of purpose, develop those social networks, and embrace change. No. Embrace the change. We got a lot of changes coming about. The boss talked about 386 is what we're going to need. We got OCPs coming up. A lot of changes just today on the aware of the OCPs. We got so many things coming up over and over and over again, and you're going to be at the heart of the matter taking care of that. So embrace the change, because we're talking about this age of innovation, and that's how we're going to do it. We're going to change everything by the innovation, by those ideas that you all have that the boss talks about all the time. This is absolutely a wing in a culture cultivated on innovation. So we're going to do that by the ideas you have in the change. And so develop your problem-solving skills. Supervisors, we expect that of you, right? You go through your PME, we expect you to go out and do those problem-solving skills. But you need to be doing it for yourself too. Make sure you're developing all of those skills that's going to make you a more resilient airman. Take care of yourself. So that goes to your physical, your mental, and your spiritual. You feed the body, you feed your mind by reading, and you feed your spirit. Make sure you're doing those things to stay more resilient, because these things are going to be laid upon our lap to change every single day. And at the end of that, I say purpose equals commitment. Again, I say purpose equals commitment. If you don't have that purpose, you won't be committed. And it's our job as leaders, it's your job as supervisors to give your people purpose so they'll stay committed.
Okay, so the force we need for the future, the force we present for the future, and that purpose in all of you as we move forward toward that force and what we need from you as airmen. So, how does that relate to what we do here today? There's a method to everything that we do. So, what's important when you look at this, you've all seen it, it's the 5 lines of effort that we are pursuing in this wing. Why are we pursuing those 5 lines of effort? It is to posture the wing for future and present challenges and conflicts. Conflicts specifically. It is the essence of what we do. Everything that you see up there is not happenstance. We do everything with a purpose, with a specific drive towards creating a specific capability. The readiness that everything from the National Defense Strategy through the Air Force's, Secretary of the Air Force's 5 priorities and the Chief of Staff's 3 focus areas, to what you consistently hear from our USAFE and 3rd Air Force commanders, lethal, responsive, resilient, trust, training, teamwork. Does that sound a lot like lethal and building partnerships? All of those things feed down to exactly this: lethality, being able to fight tonight, responsive, setting the base, having that resilience within us. The nuclear domain, obviously, in the lethality department, cyber, our capability as we reach into multi-domain operations, building that nascent capability, and of course, leaders to lead us and execute in all of those areas. We will continue to pursue down that. That is the near-term bridge that takes us towards being an effective part of that force of tomorrow. So think about that every day as you think about how we're taking steps along each of these lines of effort. All of you, every single one of you, play a role in one or more of those lines of effort. Understand where you fit where we progress on that to posture the wing, and how that fits into that force of tomorrow. So that's how we get from where we are today to where we're going tomorrow. That shows you where we're headed and hopefully helps scope for you as you think about those images that we started with. All of you along the way over the course of the past year or so, feeding up to the exercise that you were absolutely brilliant in, and then on into the MAGCOM level exercise that we finished last week with, again, performing at an absolutely stellar scale and rate. Outstanding work across the wing. Large, significant increases in capability along those lines of effort, something you should be extremely proud of. I know that the Chief and I and the entire leadership team are absolutely proud of it. And we can't thank you enough for that. So, at this point, we'll open it up for any questions that you have. And I think we got some mics out there, right? Nobody has to scream. I'm very patient. Where's Intel? You guys always have 6 or 7, right?
Sir, I got a question about the OCP, how we're moving to better, how is you safety moving ahead to organize, train, and equip us as we move forward with this new OCP concept?
So just to make sure I heard you there, Major Tom. So from the operational capability packages, is that what you said? How are we going to transform those? Is that what you said? Or how are they going to change?
No, sir. How is that going to look for you safety and AOC as they prepare to organize, train, and equip?
Gotcha. Yeah. So the core of that entire shift brings real questions about how there will without question be changes in the way that we organize, train, and equip. I will tell you right now, that was one of the first questions I came back in with because there's been a lot of discussions out there about potential changes in the way that we do organize. From an AOC specific level, there was not a great deal of discussion in terms of changes from an AOC framework. I think, are you looking down, in what way will they look to command and control as you deal with degraded environments? Yeah, so we obviously won't go in depth in this environment, but the broad picture really funnels down to what I talked about when I was discussing the right-hand side of that slide and expeditionary forces at the squadron, group, and wing level. What you can expect is more information on the front end in terms of guidance. Not all of it will be purely broad, where you can look to micromanage the fight afterwards or as it goes. More guidance on the plan, more guidance on what the expectations are in the phasing of the plan, expectations that we know it to a greater degree at lower levels, squadron commanders completely versed in the overall scheme of maneuver that we expect to happen across the joint and coalition environment. What are we expecting to see? What are ground forces doing? What should be happening in the cyber realm from space effects? All of those things are going to need to be understood at lower levels in the guidance that they push out, with the assumption that the point at which that turns off, you can turn to a commander and say, execute wartime operations. You know where we're going, go do that. Does that make sense? Good question. Others?
So I have a question. How many of you right today, starting Monday morning, are going to put on your bright and shiny OCPs? Show of hands. Okay. How many of you have already thrown away them old ABUs? Okay.
Good answer.
There's a reason why I asked that. Because there have been a few instances where people have trashed them already. And I told the boss, and he says, dude, this is September. And people are already throwing them away. So there's an OPSEC portion of that. You need to make sure you remove those items, name tape, rank, all of those things. So we're actually going to set up an amnesty box. There'll be an email that's going to be pushed out. Because I know people are excited about getting them and they want to wear them. But we don't want you to throw them away. And another reason why I tell you not to throw it away is because if you have reported instructions to go to, say, PME or to a class, and your reporting instructions say, where is the ABU, guess what you now not have? That you're going to be required to buy whenever you get there. Yeah, the boss probably could buy a set in a couple of, hours or so, but some of the other ones out here probably couldn't do that. So I ask you, please, don't throw them away just yet. I'm excited. I know people are excited about wearing those OCPs, but don't keep them in your trunk or whatever you want to do for the time being, because I guarantee you may need them. That was a good question, Chief.
Good question, Chief. And good words for everybody. Before you start slapping on your OCPs, make sure you know what you're supposed to look like. You can't go running around all crazy. Awesome. Other questions? Either one. You're next.
Hey, sir. So with reference to like how the Air Force is going to increase like the number of squadrons, what do you expect with the increase in like the number of flying squadrons? What do you think the 52nd Fighter Wing is going to look like in that time frame?
Sorry, I couldn't quite hear you through your mustache.
All right. With how the Air Force is going to increase the number of flying squadrons, what do you think the 52nd Fighter Wing is going to look like in 5 to 10 years?
Yeah, great question. So, surprisingly, the Chief of Staff of the Air Force didn't answer that one for me, but I may have tossed that one out along the line. What would I expect to see as we grow forward? So I talked a little bit about some of those capabilities that we see growing. And in what way, right? So we're not going to go buy B-52s. We're gonna go out and buy B-21s. What do I see in this theater in the future? I see an increase in F-35 as we roll out F-35 squadrons. There's a reason that I have asked across our mission support group, how do we look at our HAZs? How do we make them not just F-22 capable, but how do we make them F-35 capable? Because I want to set this base to be able to accept F-35s. In my mind, down the line, do we see a couple F-35 squadrons here? I think that's logical. Realistically, you're going to have that capability in multiple spots across. We know Lakenheath is one. Not trying to start any, don't go running the papers, but what's logical to me, Aviano, somewhere in the southern tier, is a logical place where I put F-35s, and at some point, we bring them in here. I think looking at those two, right? 2 plus 3, China, Russia, the flow of both money, equipment, and personnel, all three of those resources are flowing in a very clear way to the east and to the west. And so in my mind, as you walk that out, nobody has shown me a slide. Are there slides out there with draft ideas on it? I'm sure there are. But they're not ready to show what that idea looks like yet. But in my mind, it's logical that you see an increase in that kind of capability here down the line. But that's me talking. Disclaimer. Good question. We had one up here. What do you got, Chief?
Hey, good afternoon, sir. Hey, moving toward the OCPs that you mentioned, you believe that this will require a wing reorg, something similar to what Mountain Home is testing?
Nobody asked that question.
No?
Maybe everybody asked that question. So I will tell you, that when you look at that structure, It's tough to imagine us in our exact current composition doing that. We can do it to a degree, right? We package them together. We still have UTCs that work. Will it require some modifications to the UTCs we have now to execute that? Absolutely. Absolutely it does, right? You know, we're not ready to just go completely sustained. Most of those are built around being able to plug into an established base. But specifically when asked, the answer was we don't know. And I will tell you, I'm not surprised to hear that, but Mountain Home is getting looked at. And, you know, part of Mountain Home probably that everybody should consider is just about everybody I talk to a different picture of what does Mountain Home mean? What is happening there? You talk to some people and they go, oh, yeah, well, they just don't have any group commanders anymore. No, not exactly. They reorged a bunch of squadrons. Does that mean, oh, it's just an ops and maintenance together thing? No, that's not exactly right either. And even Mountain Home, as it transitions, some of those concepts are evolving. I sat down with Colonel Kunkel, the wing commander out there, for a little while last week to talk about how it was going. And they're pulling in lessons learned that they're feeding up. They see some progress with it. They see some challenges, which is exactly what we would expect. Is there some complement of lessons learned coming out of that I would expect to feed into those organizations on the right-hand side of that chart? I absolutely do, Chief. It's logical that we are going to have to modify the force some based on the way we sit now, right? It's all built on the idea that I can take parts and pieces and plug them into places like Al-Udeid or even Bagram, and I'm only going to send the bare minimum of what I need, which is not what you need when you're talking about an organic squadron capability that's capable of establishing, defending, C2ing, running its own operations. That's a more robust capability package than what we bring in a standard UTC. Shazam. Here, one second. He'll hook you up.
Good afternoon, sir.
What's going on?
Okay, I'm good, thank you. So, the medical group, the new ops tempo, what do you see as the medical group becoming? Would it be expanding, or would it be an inpatient setting, or stay as a clinical setting?
Yes. I will defer that question to DHA since the law has taken that out of our purview. So I don't know. I know what I will tell you is I see tension more than likely in the future in that environment. So when you think about what the Secretary of Defense has laid out in concert with guidance from the President, it certainly takes us a certain way that has a lot more to do with readiness, right? Now, does that sound a whole lot like what you've seen come out of DHA so far in terms of where we're going? Probably not. That's not what I read. I'm not the experts that you are, but when I put a layman's eye on it, I don't see that. So what I would expect is, as we're busy breaking down some of the really basic questions right now in terms of how we make all that come together, as we move towards this force of the future, I would expect to see some continued issues at a departmental level, because you've got a clear distinction between a force that I would expect DHA will want to run exactly the same all the way across the force, and that's not going to work when you think about the readiness requirements of forward positioned locations already, and then looking at capability packages that we expect to be able to move forward and have some capability that's organic, that we assume, whether you're at Shaw or Mountain Home, that you're going to be able to push forward as an entity. Certainly, if you're talking about an air expeditionary wing, it's a monster chunk, right, of your med group that you're going to expect to just pick up and run. And that doesn't sound like what DHA is planning on. And it's logical that there's a little bit of divergence, but I expect that right now there's probably a certain amount of fighting going on in the DCAOR over that discussion, and I see more of that to come. You bet.
Sir, just a quick question of, at the convention, was there any discussion about how Russia and China might respond to a significant growth in air power?
Yeah. So, not at the news level was there discussion of that. I will tell you that when you step back into the Wing Commanders Conference level and you start talking about competition and the way that it works. So competition for everybody, you know, it's not this year's competition. It's these several decades competition. And that's the way that process. Do we some sort of response? Probably. The question then gets into capability to respond and to what degree, what means are available. So when what they are doing, you'll get different answers too between the two respective competitors. The capacity that China has, if for example they were to counter that growth with an attempt to increase the growth, newsflash, they have been growing and modernizing at a rate that is frankly unsustainable over time, but they continue to manage to do it despite everybody's arguments that it can't be sustained. In this AOR, what we've seen is massive modernization that you're all aware of. Can they crank that up to any degree? Perhaps not, which then drives another question of, if not an increase in capacity or capability, then what counter move, which I think is really the core of your question. When you look at a Crimea situation, do they take additional steps to aggressively push back, knowing they've made statements like utilization of nuclear weapons in an early response? So things that are being discussed, I can tell you from personal conversations, they're absolutely being discussed at the strategic level when you talk about Air Force strategy, talking with our joint partners and the senior strategists that reside in the Office of Secretary of Defense. Those conversations are going on. That being said, it is a competition, and these moves aren't happening on accident. It's known the steps that we're taking, and it's known that it may or may not elicit a response, but it most certainly will send a message. And it's an important message that every single one of you is a part of. Awesome.
Yes, sir. Lieutenant Hibbs from Intel. Quick question. So when you're talking about this increase 24% in response to this great power competition, obviously part of that would be the requirement to project that power, especially here in the European theater. Was there any talk on the political will of our European allies to essentially support that? We see already in open source news somewhat of a wearying to a degree of like just our presence here. Has anyone really talked at all about like, hey, can we actually send an increase in 24 or more troops into the European theater, and our European allies even on board with that?
Yeah, good question. The answer to your question is yes, there is discussion, and the answer is yes, that was looked at and analyzed before the rollout. So the reality in many of the national will of a country is not as easy as the newspaper you grab. You know that, you're trained in it, right? But the reality is many of our partners that might in some cases seem squeamish or otherwise at face value in a baseline newspaper article, when you go and you sit down with their senior leaders, the message is pretty clear. And they recognize that global security, it is a partnership with all of us. There's a reason that this base is so important and this wing is so important in our connections with the partners that we have across it. And so I would tell you that the will is there. If you come to the European theater and you say, we're going to plus up, you're going to get more questions about how many can I get than you are about can you put those somewhere other than here. Okay. Others. All right. Probably one more, I'm thinking.
Sir, Senior Airman Williams from LRS. With our focus being primarily on Russia and China, are there going to be significant changes to our forces in the Middle East?
Yeah, so good question, specifically with respect to what we're doing in the Middle East. So the part that I didn't highlight in there with the NDS is that there is a continued and sustained effort against violent extremist organizations. Now that's a broad statement, right? That could mean a lot of things. But the assumption that I would tell you you should have is that there will continue to be some modicum of effort that continues in that arena. CENTCOM is still going to get a certain amount of energy that flows towards it. I think what you'll see in the growth that they're projecting is that it's going to plus up in those two arenas that we've discussed where the focus is. Will there always be an appetite to pull a certain amount away from that? The answer is yes, and whether it's apparent or not, we've done a certain amount of that already. We've already started to shift some of those high demand assets that are out there and move them into this theater, into the Pacific theater, to change the architecture with which we address those two competitors. I wouldn't say it will be extremely noticeable to you. There won't be a pull out of Afghanistan tomorrow or something along those lines, because right now, frankly, when you look at violent extremist organizations, that's still a problem set you have to deal with. So we're not going to wholesale give up on that and shift away. We've learned that lesson or we've observed that lesson at least a few times. We'll demonstrate whether we've learned it or not. Okay. I think that's probably about good time-wise. Chief, you got anything?
Yes, sir. So before we end, I'd like to end with our wing chant. So, how many of y'all know it? Wow. Okay. So we're going to do this probably multiple times now. When I say sabers, you say seek, attack, destroy. Y'all ready to do this?
On the key messages and absorb the importance of the shift in our national defense strategy and the crux of it really being what it means, the change in the world we live in. It is a categorically different world. It is a more dangerous world. It is more dangerous for every single one of us who sit here and operate and wear the uniform, and those of us who are not in uniform sitting in this AOR. So understand that shift. Great power competition here in this AOR, most specifically to our competitor to the east, that we have to respond to that as a result. And what our nation expects us to do, and the way that we will posture the force, is that we will be more lethal and we will strengthen our relationships with our allies. And we're going to do that by changing the force we need. 386 squadrons over time by 2030, and we'll change the way in which we present forces, pushing forward with a more expeditionary mindset. And that as airmen, we will need you to be more versatile. We will need you to be agile. We will need you to be hybrid. And that in doing so, you will be able to move forward with a purpose in that force of the future. So please take those things away and think, most importantly, about how critical what you do is to this AOR and to the nation and our allies. Everything that we do here, every step of training, every element of training that you do in every one of your disciplines and in aggregate, when we bring it all together for large-scale exercise, is preparation. Every day, it is deterrence every day. It is competition every day. And God help us if we're called upon. It is the readiness and the willingness to win, should it be that we have to do so. Thank you for what you do every day. Thank you. That is awesome. Have a great week.